Page 142. We'll bring in this Shabbat before Purim. Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hashalem, Malachei Elyon, Mi-melech Malachei Amlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Bochem Leshalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Baruchuni leshalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi-melech Malachei Amlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Tzeitzchem leshalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi-melech Malachei Amlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
Nice to be together. We just had our family Shabbat the first Friday of every month. We have our young families come for Shabbat dinner and taught Shabbat family Shabbat service. And there's always a little craft. And to get ready for Purim, we had the kids make groggers, which was very sweet and very loud. And apologies if there's macaroni on the floor in the social hall during the oneg. But it's such an energy. There's something about the energy of Purim, of children and joy and silliness and noise and all of these things. And sometimes I feel like it's a similar kind of thing to Shabbat. It's like the sensory shift, right, of our week, or the sensory shift in this time of year when it's just we kind of let it go and we have fun and we're silly. And on Shabbat, we also kind of let go of the stresses of our week, the stresses of the world around us, of which, of course, there are many right now. But here we are. We can just be, and we can be together and enjoy this beautiful moment in our week and moment in our sanctuary. So let us join together as we prepare to light the Shabbat candles. I forgot to ask someone to light them, so I'm going to do them. I invite you to join with Cantor Cohen.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu להדליק נר של שבת.
Oh.
It's our trick candle. We're going to begin Kabbalat Shabbat. There we go. Now Shabbat is in. On page 132 on the bottom of the page with the words Or Zarua. We lit those candles, bringing in the light of Shabbat. We sing about Or, the light, in the psalm as well. Or Zarua la tzadik. Or zaru ala tzadi u'yishrei lev simcha. One more time. Or zarua. Try it. Or zaru ala tzadi u'yishrei lev simcha. Beautiful. Or zarua. Or zarua la tzadi u'yishrei lev simcha. Simchu tzadikim. Simchu tzadikim l'Adonai. Ve'odu lezecher kodsho. Simchu tzadikim. Simchu tzadikim Adonai. Ve'odu lezecher kodsho. Or zarua, back to the top. Or zarua la tzadik u'yishrei lev simcha. Or zarua la tzadik u'yishrei lev simcha. Page 133, Mizmor Shiru. Mizmor Shiru l'Adonai, Shir Chadash, Ki niflaot asa, Hoshia lo yamino uzroa, Hoshadi Adonai Yeshuato, Le'nei hagoyim gilad simchato, Zachar chaso ve'emunato, Le'beit Yisrael, Ra'u kol atzei haaretz, et Yeshuat Eloheinu, Hariu l'Adonai kol each psalm, each melody that we use is one step closer to really getting into that mode of Shabbat from the mode of the secular week. Whatever's been going on for you this past week, we're transitioning into a peaceful time, Shabbat. Top of 134, Zamru Ladonai. Zameru Ladonai bechinor, bechinor vekol zimra. Zameru Ladonai bechinor, bechinor vekol zimra. Zameru, zamru Ladonai. Zameru, zamru Ladonai. Zameru Ladonai bechinor, bechinor vekol zimra. Zameru Ladonai bechinor, bechinor vekol zimra. So we're ready now for Lecha Dodi, page 138. When we get to that last verse, we're going to rise and face the entrance. Here we go. Lecha Dodi likat kalai adonai 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 bnei Shabbat nekabelah. Lecha Dodi likat kalai adonai 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 bnei Shabbat nekabelah. Shamor vezachor bedibor echad yishmianu elam yuchad Adonai echad u'shmo echad v'shemo tiferet v'litila. Lecha Dodi likat kalai adonai 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 bnei Shabbat nekabelah. Lecha Dodi likat kalai adonai 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 bnei Shabbat nekabelah. Likat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha ki hi mekor haberacha nerosh mikedem nesucha sof maaseh v'machshava tchila. Lecha Dodi likat kalai adonai 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 bnei Shabbat nekabelah. Lecha Dodi likat kalai adonai 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 bnei Shabbat nekabelah. Verse 3. Mikdash melech ir melucha kum mitzei mitocha haflecha rav לשבת בין מקבך והוא יחמור עלייך חמלה. Lecha Dodi likat kalai adonai 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 bnei Shabbat nekabelah. Lecha Dodi likat kalai adonai 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 bnei Shabbat nekabelah. Verse 5. Itoreri, itoreri, ki ba'orech u'mi'ori, uri, uri, shi'edameri, kevod Adonai alayich nigla. Hey, Lecha Dodi likat kalai adonai 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 bnei Shabbat nekabelah. Lecha Dodi likat kalai adonai 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 bnei Shabbat nekabelah.
We rise and face the door.
Boi leshalom ateret bala gam mesimcha ubetzola toch emunei am segula boi chala boi chala. One more time, all together, here we go. Lecha Dodi likat kalai adonai 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 bnei Shabbat nekabelah. Shabbat
Remain standing as we turn to page 263 for Chatzi Kaddish.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמרבה, ועלמא דברי חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון, ובחיי כל בית ישראל, בגלה, בגלה, ובזמן קריב ויאמרו, אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה תמירן בעלמא ויאמרו אמן. ברכו את אדוני המבורך.
ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד.
ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד.
Please be seated. Together we'll read these words on page 265. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bidvaro ma'ariv aravim, b'chokhmah poteach she'arim, ובתבונה משנה עתים, ומחליף את הזמנים, ומסדר את הכוכבים במשמרותיהם ברקיע כרצונו, בורא יום ולילה, גולל אור מפני חושך, וחושך מפני אור, ומעביר יום ומביא לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו.
אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, המעריב ערבים. אהבת עולם בית ישראל, עמך אתה. תורה ומצוות, חוקים ומשפטים, אותנו לימדת. על כן אדוני אלוהינו, בשוכבנו ובקומנו, נשיח בחוקך, ונשמח בדברי תורתך, ובמצוותיך, לעולם לעולם ועד. כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ובהם נגה יומם ולילה, באהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, ושלתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובישעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם אלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם, אמת.
Page 270, we join together in Mi Chamocha.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נהדר בקודש. נורא תהילות אוסף אלה, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה. מלכותך ראו בניך, בוקע ים לפני משה ומרים. זה לינו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך, אדוני ימלוך, לעולם ועד. ונאמר כי בד אדוני את יעקב, וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו. ברוך אתה אדוני, גאל ישראל. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום, לשלום. והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים. ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך, ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך. ברוך אתה אדוני, הפורס סוכת שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל ועל ירושלים.
Mishaberach, page 272.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל, ביני ובין בני ישראל, ביני ובין בני ישראל, אותי לעולם. ימר בדדי, שבת שבת, ימר בדדי, שבת שבת, ימר בדדי, שבת שבת, שבת שבת שלום. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש, שבת ויהי נפש. ימר בדדי, שבת שבת, ימר בדדי, שבת שבת, ימר בדדי, Shabbat, 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 Shalom.
We'll rise now as we prepare for the Amidah, beginning on page 273.
Adonai Sfatai Tiftach, Adonai Sfatai Tiftach, Ufi Yagid Tehilatecha, Ufi Yagid Tehilatecha. Adonai Sfatai Tiftach, Adonai Sfatai Tiftach, Ufi Yagid Tehilatecha, Ufi Yagid Tehilatecha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, Elohei Avoteinu ve'Imotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor ve'Hanora, Elyon Gomel חסדים טובים וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם בעזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיה מתים אתה רב להושיע, משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מחכה חיים בחסד, מחיה מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך הגבורות, ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי המתים.
אמן.
אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש.
Amen. You are holy, your name is holy, and those who are holy praise you every day. Blessed are you, Adonai, the holy God. Baruch atah Adonai, ha'el hakadosh.
Amen.
Please be seated. Continue on page 279.
רצה אדוני אלוהינו, ועמך ישראל, ותפילתם באהבה תקבל, ותהי לרצון תמיד עבודת ישראל. ישראל עמך, אל קרוב לכל קורב, פני אל עבדיך לכוננו, שפוך רוחך עלינו, ותחזינה עינינו, בשובך לציון, ברחמים. ברוך אתה אדוני, המחזיר שכינתו לציון,
Page 281. In the middle of that page are blessing of gratitude and thanksgiving, ve'al kulam.
ועל כולם, ועל כולם, יתברך ויתרומם, יתברך ויתרומם, שמך מלכנו תמיד לעולם ועד, וכל החיים יודוך סלע, ויהללו את שמך באמת, האל ישועתנו ועזרתנו, עזרתנו סלע. ועל כולם, ועל כולם, יתברך ויתרומם, יתברך ויתרומם, שמך מלכנו תמיד לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, הטוב שמך, הטוב שמך, ולך נאה נאה להודות.
Prayer for peace in our world, here, of course, in Canada, but we pray particularly for peace in Israel this Shabbat as we join together in these words of Shalom Rav 282.
Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. Ki ata melech adon lechol hashalom. Ki ata melech adon lechol hashalom. Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. B'tov beinecha levarech et amcha Yisrael bechol eit ubechol shah bishlomecha. Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. Tasim leolam. Tasim leolam.
Take a moment now for silent prayer.
Adonai tzuri vegoali. Adonai tzuri vegoali. Iyu leratzon imrefi. Ve'yon libi lefanecha. Adonai tzurim ve'goali. Adonai tzurim ve'goali. Repeat after me. May the word of my mouth and the meditation of my heart together be acceptable to you, Adonai, my rock. והגיון ליבי לפניך. אדוני צורי וגואלי, אדוני צורי וגואלי.
We'll turn to page 371 to offer Mishaberach, a prayer of healing for those, many of whom are family and friends of many of you here, but by extension part of our community, that we bring our voices and our prayers and our hopes for all of the people that we pray for, because that's what we do in community. We come together to support those, even those whom we don't know personally, but because by extension in this circle of caring we come together. We pray in particular the Shabbat for Lynn Wolfson, Rabbi Lindsay Bat Joseph, Natalie Wormelli, Yomkin Godin, Michael Green, Semach ben Menashe Halevi Varikla, Meir Tzvi, Meir Zalman ben Rachel, Daniel Gottesman, Bill Shaw, Claire Columbia, Jack Karp, Matt Good, Alicia Eckersley, Carla Zivit, Janet Gelb, David Shlomo Gorney, and Andrea Jarzbiak. If there are other names of people you're thinking of you'd like to include in our healing prayer, you can rise and share them at this time.
Mishaberach Avotenu mekor habracha leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Mishaberach imotenu mekor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
Shabbat Shalom again, everyone. Nice to be together. I just want to make a few announcements to draw your attention. Some things happening. Of course, as I mentioned earlier this evening, Purim is just around the corner. Purim will be on Monday night and Tuesday, and we'll celebrate here on Erev Purim on Monday night. It's going to be a very fun and wonderful Purim. We'll have the Megillah reading starting at 5:30. With as well as a spiel and kids in costume. And then those who would like to stay after for pizza and Hamantaschen and root beer floats and beer tasting and all sorts of things. Plus, it's a 1980s theme, so you can go back in time. We're going to have break dancing. We're going to have all sorts of crafts and things like that. If you do want to come and stay for all the events in the social hall after, we're actually nearing capacity, which is wonderful and a little scary. So if you do want to come, please sign up. We want to make sure that all of you who would like to come are able to. So you can do that online or phone the office, I guess, on Monday morning, but I would do it online before then to make sure you have space. let's see. Our next Shalom Shishim Lunch and Learn is going to be on March the 14th, kind of extending in Adar this month of Purim. It's going to be a great kind of comedy day with the Vancouver Playback Theater, so it should be really fun. So that will be on the 14th. Our next Torah-inspired leadership group with our wonderful Jeff Balin will be happening on March 22nd. It's on Zoom. And then, as you might have seen in our email that was sent today about what's happening in Israel, as part of our congregation's continued learning and celebrating Israel's 75th and engaging with Israel, we are really, really fortunate to have Joel Chasnov will be joining us. He is a comedian, an author. He's on TV and it's a podcast. I think everyone does a podcast now, but he does one too. That's going to be the weekend, the Shabbat of March 24th and 25th. We're going to have a big Shabbat dinner that night for the congregation who would like to join. He'll be engaging with us on Shabbat and Friday night and Saturday, and then on the 25th Saturday night, he's going to do a comedy show, which should be really, really fun. So we hope that you can join us for that as well. There's a few other announcements here you can read on your own, and I think that's it. So there's a lot to teach about Purim. There's so many. I love studying Megillat Esther. It's really an incredible story with a lot of different layers. But there's one phrase that is really associated with Purim, and it comes near almost the very, very end of the Megillah. And the phrase is, it's two Hebrew words, v'nafochu. And it means turning upside down. And it's really incredible. I mean, it happens in the Purim story all of the time. What's true in one moment can turn upside down just shortly later. So, for example, Queen Esther, who first appears as a closeted Jew, ends up saving the Jewish people through her identity and revealing that to King Ahasuerus. Haman's evil plot to kill the Jews turns over and leads to his own demise. And the Jews of Shushan, once powerless subjects, become powerful actors, able to control at the end their own destiny. So I want to read you the verse, the one verse where this phrase, v'nafochu, comes in the Megillah. It's in chapter 9. This is how it goes. When the king's command and decree were to be executed, the very day on which the enemies of the Jews had expected to get them in their power, v'nafochu, the opposite happened. And the Jews got the enemies in their power. The Megillah reminds us just how topsy-turvy the world can be. Purim is a celebration of subversion, inversion, and transformation. Now, usually we look at that phrase, v'nafochu, everything's upside down, as part of our background of why we do all these silly, crazy things on Purim. It's why we do the Purim shtick and the spiels and all of those things, and I love them. I think they're so fun. But I wonder if underneath this v'nafochu, this turning upside down, maybe there's a more serious message. I mean, there's kind of a revenge fantasy at the heart of the Megillah that's kind of dark. In much of Jewish history, with our people having had little, if any, military, political, or other sorts of power, maybe this revenge fantasy was actually part of the fun of the holiday. I mean, just imagine the Jews being able to fight back against their neighbors, Jews with power. But today, literally today, it makes my heart skip a beat a little bit to read the end of that verse. I'm going to read it one more time. The Jews got their enemies in their power. Part of living in a time when we do, as Jews, actually, we have a great deal of power. And it makes reading this story in the ways in which we see ourselves reflected within it quite complicated. Our power is very much, in many ways, a blessing, our ability to be self-reliant in our security within the world, something if we had only had it 90 years ago would have made an unfathomable difference in the lives of our people. And at the same time, the dangerous limits of power are very much on our minds, as we saw with the unconscionable actions of Jews pursuing vigilante justice against civilians in the West Bank this week. On Monday night, hundreds of Jewish settlers stormed an Arab village called Hawara to avenge the murder of 2 Jewish men from a nearby settlement. This violent intimidation has been seen before, but this vicious pre-planned attack on Hawara involved many more people and much more violence than usual. The mob set fire to cars and property, burning dozens of houses, including one with a family inside who were rescued by the IDF. Hundreds were injured, some seriously, and a 37-year-old Palestinian man was killed. Many, including within our own Jewish community, have called this out, many using the term pogrom, which is interesting and in some ways probably accurate. But some members of the current coalition in the Knesset encouraged the settlers. Later, one called the destruction that they wreaked in Hawara as effective deterrence. V'nahafochu, the world seems upside down to me. The regular parasha, the Shabbat, is Tetzaveh. But in honor of this Shabbat, the Shabbat before Purim, we call this Shabbat, as Cantor Cohen mentioned before, Shabbat Zachor, which is the Shabbat of memory, because we read the Shabbat, or actually, well, we probably won't read, but many synagogues read an extra snippet from Deuteronomy about Amalek, about Zachor, remember Amalek. He was kind of like the original enemy of the Jewish people. And in fact, Haman is considered a descendant of Amalek, which is why we connect it with Purim. The Torah's first account of Israel's war with Amalek, we actually just read a few weeks ago in Exodus, right after the splitting of the sea. Then Joshua leads a battle against the Amalekites while Moses at first stands and then sits on a stone on a hill above the action. And as long as Moses' arms are raised, the Israelites prevail. And when his arms fall, the Amalekites prevail. And so Aaron and Hur, they help support Moses' arms. He probably looked kind of funny with the 2 people holding his arms. But then the verse continues in the Torah and says about Amalek, God says to Moses, "Write this as a remembrance in the book and recite it to Joshua. I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven." God tells later that the Israelites have to remember Zachor, Amalek, to blot out and to remember, to hold both of these things at once. But it's interesting that later, the verses that are read traditionally this Shabbat, the obligation is transferred not from Moses to Joshua, but from Moses to all of the Israelites, to all of us to remember. What we must remember to blot out, I think, on Shabbat Zachor, is not necessarily Amalek or the Amalekites. They're long gone. We're still here. But it is their behavior. What did Amalek do? They didn't merely come and fight as an enemy, but they attacked from behind when Israel was hungry and weak, targeting the stragglers at the back. Amalek was signaled out by God for ruthlessness. What are we required to remember and to blot out? I believe it is the gratuitous violence and abusive behavior in our own society, the shameless violations of what we call human rights today, that are identified with Amalek and memorialize him each time we commit them. As we gather on this Shabbat Zachor and hear these words, remember what Amalek did to you. Maybe v'nahafochu, we should turn them upside down and consider the Amalek inside of us. Part of our world feels upside down, but we too can flip it. We have the ability to set it right, to be clear about our values as Jews and as Zionists, as we make sense of our power and try to turn it right. Shabbat Shalom. We'll turn now to page 586. I'll invite you to please rise for Aleinu.
Aleinu לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד הארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגובה מרומים. הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס ולטוב, ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום והשבות אל לבבך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת, אין עוד ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
May be seated. So as has become our custom in the past few months at Temple Sholom, we are very honored to invite members of our community on the Shloshim, 30 days after the death of a loved one, to share a few reflections and memories. And we want to invite Barb Lando to come and speak a bit about her father, Michael, of blessed memory.
Hi. It's funny writing on a legal pad because that's what my dad always wrote on. When the Klei Kodesh asked whether I'd like to speak about my dad tonight on the final Shabbat of his Shloshim, I knew I was interested because there's really so much to say about any person. We are so little known, really, by most people, all of us, and so I wondered what I would want to share about this all-important figure in my own life story with people who had never met him, and many likely not to have ever met me. What would seem meaningful? What would I share with you? What would be relevant? What was essential to that man? My dad was a complicated human being, like all of us, and as my brother pointed out, this being the Shabbat before Purim, it's one where we're remembering Zachor, and it feels fitting that tonight is the beginning of a Shabbat where we're commanded to remember. It's kind of kismet-y in my mind that I'm going to remember my dad for all of you who never knew him on this day where we're commanded to remember. And also fitting that the letter that our Klei Kodesh sent out to congregants today, imploring us to take action on the urgent need to make our diaspora voices heard with regard to the unholy and imminent threat to Israeli democracy under the new ultra-nationalist extremist government. Because one of the things that they suggested we could do is to make a donation to the new Israel Fund of Canada. And it's funny because as a strong social justice and human rights advocate, my father was a supporter of the New Israel Fund as far back as the early 1980s. So when I made a donation in his name and his memory, blessed that it is, this afternoon after receiving that email, I just sat and remembered the man and his commitment to that organization. I remember once hosting one of the directors of the New Israel Fund at our house, the very scholarly Jewish feminist activist Alice Shalvey, when she came to Pittsburgh. And I think she stayed at our house, actually. My dad, at the time of the First Intifada, was really involved with another organization called Peace Now, which believes strongly that we should negotiate with Palestinians and trade land for peace. And my dad was one who didn't really care what others in the community felt. He was really going against the grain in the Pittsburgh Jewish community where we come from when he loudly advocated on those principles, advocated for those principles. And it's funny because when I gave a eulogy at my dad's funeral last month, one of the things I said is that you could tell a lot from a person about, especially my dad, from his file folders and from his bookshelves. And among his files, which I combed through after he died, was a file called Correspondence. And my dad was a beautiful writer. He was trained as a lawyer. He had a great mind, and he wrote exquisitely, like even if it was just like a message to somebody. But the letters that he wrote, that he saved in his correspondence file, had all originally been written on, the yellow legal pad in his scrawl, and then faxed, in some cases, once the fax machine was invented, to a secretary who then typed it, because he couldn't type. But all these letters were all typed out and beautifully preserved, like copies of them, in this correspondence file. And then there was another file that said Yitzhak Rabin. I was like, well, Dad has a Yitzhak Rabin file. And when you opened it, it was a series of letters back and forth from my dad to Yitzhak Rabin, and from Yitzhak Rabin back to my dad. Like, he wrote him back himself. And it was at the time when Rabin was the defense minister of Israel, and my dad was imploring him, begging him, I'm sure as some activist, directive of Peace Now, but imploring him to negotiate with Yasser Arafat, needed to negotiate, needed to meet and come together with, the other party of this dispute. And it was amazing. Rabin wrote back, himself. It was a beautiful series of 5 letters back and forth where I was just, it's a perfect example of my dad. This is the kind of man he is. He takes action about things which he believed in deeply. And while he was definitely an atheist, a committed atheist, he was a Jewish man who believed strongly in the need for a Jewish state. And he wasn't afraid to just say what he felt. Files and books. You're likely to have found, say, a dog-eared copy of the Federalist Papers on my dad's bookshelf, as every book ever written by Calvin Trillin, the food writer. He was a lover of Shakespeare, and probably the person he was most devoted to in the world was whom he began to date when he was only 15 and she was 13. And they married at 17 and 19 and stayed married for 62 years until he died in her arms in February. And it was a beautiful, peaceful death, if you can say that. He was in no pain. He was in his own home. He was in my mother's arms, surrounded by his children. And he was just a really great guy, really bright. And I would be remiss if I didn't say the one thing is that curiosity was fundamental to who he was. He was a curious person. He always sought to understand. And he researched. He was just a devoted scholar, really. And he will be remembered in the stories that our very strong Jewish community in Pittsburgh carry and will share for years to come, I'm sure. So that's just a little something about my dad. And thanks for allowing me to share.
Thank you so much, Barb. May his memory be a blessing. We'll invite, as we remember Michael Lando, we also share the names of those for whom we are in a period of Shloshim and are reciting Kaddish for Yahrzeit this week. I invite you, as I recite the name of your loved one, if you would please stand as you honor their memory. We're in a period of Shloshim for Rhoda Brody, Jay Denbo, Joan Fader, Kenneth Garfinkel, Ann Hirsch, Robert James Jones, Sherry Klein, Michael Lando, and Eric Schneider. And we recite Yahrzeit this week for Percy George Abelson, George Arado, Frankie Arbor Pauley, Shayla Atnikov, Hetty Balin, Miklos Berkovitz, Murray Bloom, Henry Brezer, Sophie Butts, Jacob Chernoff, David Coblin, Ben Cohen, Ray Conrad, Anita Dorfman, Dina Elias, Antonia Farago, Joseph Feyerman, Benjamin Yuri Feldman, Michael Felstein, Maxine Gelfand, Marcia Goldfeder, Fanny Gordon, Mary Gray, Harold Hammer, Jean Hockman, Ruben Sakna Kahanovitz, Maurice Cantor, Sarah Elsie Katz, Esther Corbin, Harold Crivel, Betty Linebird, Frank Levy, Louis McGill, William Valentine Armstrong McDevitt, Rose Morris, Alistair Nichols Smith, Gertrude Ornstein, Sandy Ozer, Laura Rigler, Stephen Rivers, Annalise Robins, Moritz Rosen, Samuel Rubenstein, Becky Schloss, Leah Ita Schneider, Lee Schwenk, Sally Seidler, Bill Simmons, Jack Slabinski, Harry Tregabov, Marguerite Walker, Daniel Waterman, Sadie Wenner, Norman White. There are others who have come to say Kaddish, those in the first year of mourning. If you would rise and share the name of your loved one at this time. We stand together now as one community beside those who mourn. I invite you to join with them in these words of Kaddish, page 598. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala v'zman kari v'imru, amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam l'omei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitatar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei dekudsha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru, amen. Yehi shlam rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru,
Amen.
amen. Zichronam livracha, may their memories always be a blessing. Amen. So we'll remain standing. We're going to do Kaddish and Motzi.
Is there a Kaddish cup away?
Is there no Kaddish cup? Oh.
I don't see a Kaddish cup. Unless it's hiding here.
Why don't you do a closing song and I'll get a Kaddish cup.
We'll do that. Okay. We're going to end with that same nigun that we started with. It's called Bina's nigun, if you were wondering. And it's very joyous for the month of Adar and Purim. That's what we're always doing. We're always going back and forth between serious and somber and a little bit more lighthearted. Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya 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 la 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 la. Vayer vayvoker yom hashishi, vayachulu hashamayim v'haaretz v'chol tzevam, vayachal Elohim bayom hashvi melachto asher hasa, vayishbot bayom hashvi mikol melachto asher hasa, vayavarach Elohim et yom hashvi, vayakadesh oto, ki hivo shavat mikol melachto asher bara Elohim lasot. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kodsho be'ahava uvratzon hinchilanu, zikaron lema'aseh v'reshit, ki hu yom techila lamikrae kodesh, Zecher letziat Mitzrayim, Kivanu v'acharta v'otanu kidashta mikol ha'amim, v'shabbat kodshecha be'ahava uvratzon
Hinchaltanu Baruch Atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat.
Amen.
Chaim.
Chaim.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Amen.
Shabbat Shalom. Please join us in our social hall for our Oneg Shabbat. Well,